should go red.
Yeah, it's red.
Okay, and just, make it so I'm in the viewfinder. Okay, so today we're going to talk about Lucifer and Ahriman. And there's a lot to say, and I'm not going to be able to say it all because, as I said, there's a tremendous amount of material that's starting to put out about these two. Now, if you don't know who Lucifer and Ahriman is, you have to know them. It's very important. They are two spiritual beings who are known as the opposing spiritual powers or the adversary powers. And Lucifer, they both work to, shall we say, what's the proper word? They work to direct evolution in a way that is not intended, human evolution, spiritual development, in a way that is not intended by the wise guidance of the world, the spiritual beings that have to do with the wise guidance of the world. They oppose the proper destiny and mission, spiritual mission of humanity and the earth. On the one hand, Lucifer, well, to talk about Lucifer first, because Lucifer, now this is very important information. Lucifer is a spiritual being who essentially rebelled against the, should we say, the wise guidance of the world. And it is also important to realize that both of them bring beneficial effects along with their adversarial effects. And furthermore, the fact that they're in opposition to us as human beings in our spiritual development is actually purposefully there in order for us to develop ourselves spiritually. In other words, we need hindrances in order for us to develop. It's like it's only through making errors that we can learn from our errors and grow. And so these obstacles that are placed by these two in terms of our spiritual development are there if we approach them in the proper way, are there as they are there as, shall we say, powers that are there for us to hone ourselves in terms of our own spiritual development. But we need to be aware of their activities. Now, Lucifer actually incarnated in a human being in the Far East around 3000 BC. He was allowed as a boy. He grew up as a boy in a fairly, should we say, well-off family, and was allowed to hang about the mystery center in this part of East Asia, because the initiates had prophesied that this would be a boy in whom this spiritual being, very highly developed spiritual being, Lucifer, would incarnate. And he did around the time the kid was 40 years old. And he lived as a man of flesh and blood on the earth around about the beginning of 3000 BC. And it was his inspiration that brought about what is known as paganism, of which yin and yang, and the five transformation theory, and all the stuff that we use in Maccabees is a product of Luciferic wisdom. That's really important to understand. So the question is not that the wisdom is false, because we obviously know through our own experience living and eating macrobiotically and studying yin and yang and macrobiotic thinking and macrobiotic way of eating, macrobiotic way of life, we know it is a profound wisdom. So the only question is, to what use or what ends is that wisdom put? In other words, is it put towards the beneficial use of all humanity, or is it put to the selfish use of a select few. And the initiates that were in the mystery school, because in those ancient times there were mystery schools everywhere, all over the known world, both in Asia and the Middle East and Europe and even America. There were mystery schools. But these mystery centers were kept secret. Nobody in the regular population knew of their existence. And the initiates in those mystery centers would gain their information, their spiritual knowledge through their own practices, and then they would divulge to the population the fruits of their, their spiritual investigations, if it was going to be of benefit. So in other words, all of civilization was directed from these mystery centers, but nobody in the population knew of the existence of these mystery centers. And they were everywhere. And those ones that up from the time of Lucifer onwards, they were basically Luciferic. And the initiates made sure that the knowledge that they gained through the Luciferic impulse and the Luciferic inspiration was not put to selfish uses. So it was highly beneficial. And that was, as I said, 3000 BC. Then we had the Incarnation of Christ. Approximately, 2012 years ago. And that was a counterbalance, because the thing is with the Luciferic tendency is if we give ourselves over, which is in every human being, you can't escape it. It's part of our human makeup, is to take us out of ourselves into the realm of fantasy and illusion and hallucinations. And for us to have essentially, what Steiner says is that the fundamental goal or desire of Lucifer with regard to humanity is to make us forget our primal beginnings. In other words, for us to forget the names of the spiritual beings that created us, and for us to have a disdain for the earth. We want to have nothing to do with it. He wants us to kind of just take off and go into a spiritual realm which is his. That's what he wants. Now Christ incarnated as a counterbalance to that. Now we have Ahriman. Now Ahriman, Lucifer, as I said, had his day, so to speak. He was the ruling, what you might call the ruling power in Earth spiritual development, Earth evolution, all the way up until Greco-Roman times and a little bit beyond. But then his influence began to wane in terms of being the principal influence. And of course, nobody knew. The population in the world had no clue about the incarnation of Ahriman. And similarly, for the most part, nobody had a clue about the incarnation of Christ except for a certain small circle. Many people are in the Middle East, in Palestine and Bethlehem and those places. Even though Christ incarnated in Jesus of Nazareth, when Jesus of Nazareth was 30 and Christ lived on the earth for 3 years and a third years, for the most part, so even though he walked among people, most people had no clue that this was a God incarnated in a human being. And those that did know, the small circles, on the one hand opposed him vigorously, what's known as the Pharisees and the Sadducees, which were basically, now the interesting thing about this is they were the initiate in the mystery schools in the Hebrew tradition, and they opposed Christ because Christ was bringing this initiate knowledge and the initiation that went along with it to everybody. I mean, the whole story of the raising of Lazarus is essentially Christ making initiation available to everybody who wishes to put the effort into it. That's the thing. And the priests and Sadducees and Pharisees, they were very much opposed to that, which is why they got Judas to betray him and Pontius Pilate to wash his hands of him. and put him and crucify him and so forth. But nevertheless, the crucifixion had to take place. There was no getting around that. But that's another story. Now, since around the beginning of the 14th century, 1514, around there? No, not 14th. Let's see, yeah, 15th, so 1413, around there. These dates are approximate. Humanity began to be influenced by Ahriman. So Ahriman appeared later on the scene. Now Ahriman's goal is to make humanity totally unaware in every respect, and to have a complete disavowal and hostility toward anything spiritual. That's his goal. Which at the same time will bring about a sclerosis of the human being, such that we will no longer spiritually develop, and we will become, shall we say, walking automatons, totally enslaved to Ahriman, and that's his goal. Now, Christ does act as a counterbalance to that. So, the point is that Ahriman is preparing for his own incarnation in a human body shortly. First third of the 21st century, the third millennium. That's when he's due to incarnate. And what Steiner has done is said, okay, this incarnation can't be avoided. It's going to happen. And the only question is are we prepared to be able to confront this Ahrimanic incarnation in the proper way, so we can direct it in the proper way, in the proper channel? Or are these indications that Ahriman is making his preparations going to be regarded by the vast majority of humanity as a good thing, and therefore have vast numbers of people who are enslaved to Ahriman? All right, so now he's been sending his forces into the human soul since, as I said, around 1413, and this is the age where intellectualism began. In other words, scientific abstract knowledge began, where we began to use our intellect, our intelligence, to understand the material world of nature, of the stones and the plants and the rocks and the wind and the rain and the moon and the chemicals and so forth and so on. We studied nature in order to understand the so-called laws of nature. That was the task that we had to go through as individuals and as a civilization as a whole, because that prepared us for our being able to think out of our own resources objectively and freely. The whole purpose of science, materialistic science, is to be able to make us able to objectively observe the world as factual phenomenon, and thereby deduce or